this is Dixie from Weedeater, and you're watching Heavy New York. Heavy New York!
What is up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York. We are back at Elsewhere in Brooklyn, and we are here with Dixie of Weedeater. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Man, thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's so awesome to have you here. So you told me before we started rolling, you are finally working on some new music to follow up to Goliath, and you want to talk about how that's been going so far?
Oh, yeah, we've just been so busy on the road that we hadn't had a lot of time to mess with it. But when we're home for a little bit of time, me and Shep have been getting together and writing some riffs, putting some stuff together, and we will get it together and assemble it as soon as we have time to do it.
Now, as somebody who does listen to Weedeater, I feel like, every album does stand out on its own, like when you compare like Injustice for Y'all to now to Goliath. And like, do you take a new approach to every album, or is there kind of like a formula that you try to stick with?
Well, it is cave metal at the end of the day. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, you know what I'm saying? We don't want it to go over people's heads. I want it to hit them right in the chest. And so we pretty much have the same idea, the same type of formula for every record, really. There are a little bit of differences between them, and we'll generally get a theme and run with it. But other than that, as far as the actual writing style and the style of the music, it's very similar.
Okay. Is there like an art to keeping it interesting? Because, like I've talked to the guys in Cannibal Corpse, being around for so long, they're always making the same like death metal records. So like, is there like an art to maybe keeping the writing process interesting if you stick with a formula?
I think so. In my opinion, with what we're trying to do anyway, like I said, it being cave metal is less is more, in a lot of ways. And it is, it's extremely easy to play, in my opinion, for what I do. I don't know about, playing the drums that hard, how easy that is. But this music is, in my opinion, easy to play and hard to write.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned you have like a theme for each record that you try to run with. Could the theme ever obviously it could determine lyrics, but does that maybe help determine the composition of a song as well?
Maybe a little bit, but mostly the theme is to let the lyrics run away with that one, Yeah.
Of course. As somebody who has seen you live, like the last time I saw you was on the Corrosion of Conformity Crowbar tour, which was awesome. One thing, what I was curious about is, do you have a similar energy into playing live as you do when you're songwriting, or is it a completely separate art altogether?
Well, a lot of the stuff that we have written in the past, we've written on acoustic guitars. And if you can write something heavy on an acoustic guitar, when you plug it in and plug it into that shit, it's going to be super heavy. So I think it's a good idea to try and do that. So it's a little bit of a different process than the way we attack it live, for sure.
Yeah. They say acoustic guitar can't be metal, but an acoustic guitar is so raw, you plug it into that PA system.
That's right. Right. So if you can write it on acoustic and it sounds heavy, that when you turn around and plug it into, 400 watts of solid state gear and 415s, it's going to be heavy.
Oh, you're using solid state? You don't use tube amps or anything?
Shepard plays through Marshall tube head 59 plexi, but I use solid state Sun stuff.
Oh, really? Some people would argue, especially for the raw style that you have, it's better to stick with tube amps. Is there a specific reason why you choose solid state?
Well, the main reason is they're basically tanks, and if you're going to be dragging them all over the country and all over the world, they'll just fucking break. I don't think that it's as easy for him to get away with solid state on guitar. I do like the fact that he plays a Marshall tube head, but for me, just the 200 watts of raw power running into each cabinet, I just daisy chain them together, and it's fine.
Yeah. That has to create some contrast too in the live presence, right? Like maybe you have to be a real guitar nerd to figure it out, but you could tell that's the tube amp, that's the solid state amp.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. They definitely sound a bit different, but then when you put them together, it almost sounds like one thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Do you have to adjust the presets? And is there a certain preset you have in the solid state amp that you always have to set with extra reverb, extra gain, or something like that?
My method is to turn every single knob on it on 10 except the treble on 0.
Fair enough. I love the simplicity of your gear.
Yeah, that's the idea. So,
man, and I think you would be a guitar tech's wet dream to work with.
Yeah, I don't think, unless your sound reinforcement people try and overthink it, I think that we're one of the easiest bands in the world to mix if you don't try and overthink it. Yeah. It's quite simple,
Well, kind of with both your sound and listening to an album, your music is so raw. And I was actually interviewing Joel from Toxic Holocaust about this. When you make like a record that's very, very raw, is there still some mixing or mastering or producing that you kind of have to like adjust? Or being that the record is so raw, you kind of tend to leave the raw take as original as possible?
We try and leave it about as original as possible, and we've been fortunate in the past and worked with some of the best people in the world that record analog. Billy Anderson, and then the past 3 records with Steve Albini. Steve is great at just catching what it sounds like in the room, and that's pretty much what we're after.
Yeah, definitely. You almost don't need to make a live album because it just sounds like
they're almost live albums anyway.
Yeah.
Right? We don't multi-track anything. We record everything together. We don't do the drums first or anything like that. We record it in a live setting, and then maybe overdub guitar leads and then overdub vocals. So other than as far as the drums and the guitar and the bass, they're recorded at the same time, so in a live setting.
Yeah. Somebody once told me that a live album is almost just kind of like listening to porn on the radio. It's not necessary.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, it's not very necessary. Yeah.
I didn't make that up for the record.
Okay, well, I get it. Yeah. It makes sense.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to like getting inspired to write, especially because I know that the previous record before Goliath and Jason and the Dragon, I believe it's called, yep, which came out in 2011, then you put out like a record in 2015 for Goliath, and so you take like a good break in between albums. That has to allow you to sort of like approach the studio with a clean slate, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And like I said before, we're pretty busy as far as a touring band goes, so that has a lot to do with it too. But we're not in any rush to do anything. Somebody asked me earlier that you happen to release a record every 4 years, and that means you're late on this one. I said, well, I didn't even notice that, but we're never late or early. We're like the sloth hiking team. We'll get there when we get there.
And after Tool taking 13 years, I think you guys could get away with it.
We'll be okay. Yeah.
You got to try to upstage Tool now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And we're still waiting for another I Hate God record, System of a Down record.
Right, of course. Right. So yeah, we will get there when we get there. Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah. And that's how you know it's done right.
That's right.
Now, when it comes to like sort of like getting inspired to write, do you almost have to like put yourself in a certain room or a certain element in order to get into the songwriting mode, or do you sometimes just think of an idea out of nowhere, out of the blue sometimes?
Both. We like to jam in our band room and also on my screened-in porch when we do the acoustic stuff, like I was telling you. But if something comes to you, you try and make note of it and keep a hold of it. And a lot of it is just off the top of your head. So. Okay.
Yep. And the final question I wanted to ask you, save the most difficult question for last. How do you know when a song is done?
That's a very good question. We try not to overthink it too much, so pretty much first tries are good enough for us, and when it's done, it's done. It'll tell you.
Is it fair to say that most of the songs in your catalog are almost kind of like the first take?
Yes, that is very fair to say. Yes.
That's awesome. Man, producer, guitar tech, you guys got to be the easiest people to work with.
We're pretty damn easy to work with, yes. In my opinion.
Awesome. So before we go, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. It's going to be a kick-ass show tonight. Is there just anything else you'd like to promote for Weedeater after the tour with Goddamn Gallows and the Atomic Bitch Wax? So, can you give us maybe a time frame when we could get a new album? Or
Yep, we're going to hope to get in there as soon as we can. After we do this run with Gallows, we will take a couple of weeks off and we will write a little bit, and then we go do the West Coast run with Gallows, and then we have a bunch of stuff coming up. We're going down to South America, and we're going to play a festival in Portugal. We're going back to Europe, but we'll squeeze it in there. We'll get it in there somewhere.
You should just like surprise release it. Like everybody's releasing albums on like a Friday. You just got to release it on like a Monday, like afternoon or something like that.
Yeah, why not?
But Dixie, great to see you. Everybody, Dixie of Weedeater, new stuff coming hopefully very soon. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.